I am with Leon Zurawicki, professor at the University of Massachusetts at Boston, one of the pioneers of the field in neuromarketing. He wrote, an author of a book that was published 5 years ago, Neuromarketing, that was based on academic and proposed for academic reasons. Leon, thank you very much to join us in this conversation about neuromarketing.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Edgar, for inviting me to that interview.
Great. Leon, let's start with the elementary things. What is neuromarketing?
Well, what is elephant? You know when you see it. It's a new discipline, so basically we are still struggling whether certain techniques and approaches used are to be qualified as neuro or not. But as we see it today, it's a blend, it's a mix of various methodologies which have in common one thing. They look at the neuronal correlates of people's behavior, preferences, and decision making. It's a technology advanced discipline which is focusing on inner reactions which can be detected in the body, in the brain, and in the neuronal system of the human beings. So anything which serves the purpose of measuring those reactions would qualify as neuromarketing.
Good. Interesting. What are the complexities of neuromarketing?
Oh, it's a very complex discipline because we have to understand that a lot of methodology and theory behind it comes from medicine, comes from psychology, psychiatry. So to adapt it to marketing problems, analysis of the consumer, is not that simple for one obvious reason. Medicine is usually preoccupied with people who suffer from illnesses. And here we want to study normal people. So it requires some adaptations and actually pretty creative approaches to see how this apparatus, which is supposed to detect abnormalities and illnesses, can be used to study normal reactions. That adds to the complexity of not just neuromarketing, but anything we use to study human decisions. But neuromarketing is no exception. We're actually making advances and progress, and we know every year a little bit more, thanks to the abundance of studies which each individually contribute to our knowledge, but we have still a long way to go.
Yeah. Okay, this is a starting field.
Right. We're still in the nascent stage of the field of the discipline.
Good, good. What is the way to measure neuromarketing projects, the metrics, the successful?
If you want to demonstrate that there is value in using neuromarketing research, you would probably apply very similar indices as to any kind of a project. There's a certain cost, there's a certain value you attribute to reliability, there's a certain measure of quality of what you get, and in terms of providing a good service to the client, you basically have to be on your toes to demonstrate that the money is well spent. Now, in my opinion, it might be a little bit erroneous to directly link the results of any research, including neuromarketing research, to sales. The end result, which might actually produce certain volume of sales, is not only the consequence of a state of mind of a person at the time when he or she is being observed. There are a lot of other factors which determine whether finally the person becomes a buyer or not. So one has to be very careful, and I would not necessarily recommend that in the first place you compare the additional sales volume to whatever effort and research directed advertising campaign, for example, to the sales. It is far more complex and complicated than that. Okay. What I would like to add, though, that we should pay attention to some qualitative indices. if, as a result of neuromarketing research, you can point to the client that there are certain ways to increase the awareness of your offering, to figure out what are the factors which contribute to liking of what you have compared to the competitors. That information, even though it does not suggest direct increase of sales, shows how you can improve on your other marketing activities. And clearly you can demonstrate that this is something which is very beneficial to the client.
Good, very good. Talking about a particular thing of the methodology, and even more particular about the sample size. In terms of the sample size, does neuromarketing require a big sample size and on the other hand, a representative one?
I'm sure that different experts might have different opinions on this subject. It would be very tempting to think that because of the technology, we only look at the brains or other type of reactions of, say, 20 people, and that could predict the behavior of the crowd. I personally don't believe in that for the simple reason that it has not been the case in other fields of science. Obviously, the whole issue of the sample size is being raised in the context of two factors. One is the cost. Some of the neuromarketing studies can be pretty expensive, and the number of participants increases the eventual cost of the study. The second one is, obviously, the bigger the sample, the longer it takes to not just collect the data, but even to analyze that. However, there is a rule of thumb which you might take from me if you want, that the sample size should be at least, for this consumer studies, 50 participants. And in many instances, the companies actually have bigger samples than that. It's not really such a big problem in terms of either the budget or in terms of handling that. The most common context where this becomes a really serious issue is when fMRI is being applied because of the substantial cost of this type of undertaking. But first of all, fMRI is just only one methodology. Second, even the cost of fMRI are coming down. So in a sense, I suspect that in the future, this is not going to be such a tremendously serious issue as it's being considered now.
Good. Nothing is perfect. Obviously, neuromarketing is not an exception. So what are the limitations of neuromarketing?
Well, there are many. First of all, the question is, how well can we interpret the data? Collecting data is, as I said, not such a difficult issue to grasp, at least depending on some techniques, because if you think that EEG has been around for more than 100 years, there's a lot of experience and knowledge in terms of which waves, to which extent, and what kind of oscillations, fluctuations can actually demonstrate certain things happening in the brain. The problem, rather, is that the whole skill in marketing research depends on how you phrase and frame the question. If you ask the wrong question, you will get the wrong answer. Mm-hmm. And one needs to know the limitations of the methodology being used to make sure that, A, one doesn't make false promises, and one can actually detect what one is looking for. To give you an example, we would like to study emotions, for example. Everybody will tell you that emotions actually drive our behavior, and this is a far more important factor than it was previously assumed. That's okay. The type of emotions we can measure today does not necessarily correspond with typical emotions of a consumer watching commercials. So if you are limited to that kind of apparatus, you might find that, yes, you detect certain reactions, or you do not detect certain reactions, but they are irrelevant. When people watch commercials, they are seldomly scared by what they see. First of all, because they know that, unlike if you go to the movies, this is not real. Somebody's trying to sell you something. And second, we don't even pay that much attention when we watch advertising. So the point is that if you get an apparatus which is going to measure fear, anger, positive or negative emotions, by the way, not all of them are actually relevant to what you are studying. And yet you are limited because for the time being, the technology can only allow you to do certain things. So for that matter, there is a problem. The other problem is that one, in my opinion, should be very cautious about interpreting the results and making recommendations. Things are a little bit more complicated than just simply linking pleasure of responding to certain stimuli with the willingness to buy. It takes quite a while, and you might be pleased with a lot of things, and yet absolutely not interested in purchasing. Plus, another thing with all those studies, and I hope this is actually changing now, although it's a difficult step to make, is that, as you know, most decisions we make are not actually individual decisions. Mm-hmm. In a family setting, it's all the members of the family who, to a certain extent, influence each other, especially on certain decisions, let's say family vacation. So now, in order to address those issues, you would have to study 4 brains simultaneously while they interact. And this is a much more difficult exercise. Yet, the beauty of this approach would be that you can get actually a much more accurate picture of what's happening. If you add to that what is actually very, very popular these days, namely people communicating on social networks, then the number and the strength of influences is magnified even further. I don't know how many fans or followers you have on social networks. Suppose you have, moderately speaking, 100. If all of them send you some signals and some advice, the question is, how in your brain are you going actually to consider all these at the same time? So I believe in order to be more realistic than we are today, we have to move one step further and consider the situation where joint decisions are made and not just focus on one specific individual at a time. Easier said than done.
Good. Leon, what are the aspects to become or to identify a good neuromarketing in terms of training, knowledge, skill? I'm asking this because nowadays the knowledge is very accessible. It's either very cheap or even free. So the knowledge in general, but neuromarketing as well.
You can get an application on your smartphone.
For instance, or you can buy a couple of books for a few dollars, for a few euros. So it's very accessible. On the other hand, the neurotechnologies are becoming accessible as well because the prices are dropping down as the time is going by, as with any other technology. So accessibility of knowledge, accessibility of technologies. I have read, I have viewed people who is claiming to do neuromarketing with suspicious background, and I'm saying suspicious to say a kind word. So the question is because of that. So what are the requirements or the aspects for a good neuromarketing to identify it or to become?
Well, maybe one of the things or reasons we have this association, neuromarketing, Science and Business Association, is that yes, you need certain standards and you need some referrals. It's like hiring anybody to do any work for you. You want to make sure that the company or the person is qualified and can deliver. Now, how do you actually recognize who is actually worth being awarded your contract is a function of a number of things. First of all, one needs to understand one thing. I believe this was raised at that conference as well as in previous conferences. You can actually have 2 different situations. One is, suppose I am a neuroscientist. I know anything there is about how the neuronal system and the brain response, what are the areas of the brain which process different types of reactions, and so on. That does not yet mean that you know at the same time enough about marketing. So what is obviously important, it's neuromarketing. It's a blend of two fields. What happens very often is that there are people with neuroscientific background who think that, if I can measure certain type of reactions in the brain as a result of certain stimulus, what is the difference between this type of work I am doing and applying this to studying the impact of advertising? Now, that's obviously true, except that once you have the data, once you find that there is some kind of relationship between different variables, you have to put it into a context. And that's where the problem begins. So if you do know how to handle methodology, how to interpret the pictures of the brain, that's the first step. Typically, people with the neuroscientific background who get into neuromarketing don't know enough about marketing. They can learn about it.
Yeah.
Coming from another end, you might know everything about neuromarketing, about marketing and marketing research, but you don't understand how the technology works. So you might actually, ideal thing is a partnership. So when you look for a company, you would like to make sure that chief technology or chief scientific officer has enough credentials as a scientist in the field of neuroscience. But at the same time, there's somebody with background education and training in marketing who could definitely help to structure the project and interpret that. Now, many companies have solved this problem so that they have experts from two fields on their staff. It's very difficult these days to find actually one person who would combine in one just, particular responsibility, those two type of knowledge. Yes, there are inexpensive gadgets, and one might say, why do I need anybody to measure my blood pressure or my pulse or my anything? And there is a temptation that at least with those devices you can monitor, you can get a lot of data on a daily basis. The question is, like with any big data, whether you know how to use it and what do you get out of that. So the trick is, and I believe the greatest skill in doing neuromarketing research is to be able to develop certain scenarios and either be reactive, so the client says, I have the following problem, please help me to solve it, or you can go to the client and say, listen, I think that you would be interested in this type of study because it can help you with certain decisions you have to make. Now, you're not going to stop that trend. iPhone will pretty soon be equipped with all kinds of applications which are going to measure the quality of your sleep, your emotions when you speak to your loved one, anything you want, and that would allow even individuals to self-monitor themselves for their own purpose. So the interesting thing is that in order to spot and to make sure that any neuromarketing is actually serious, one should not reject those techniques, but one should be able to apply something simultaneously to almost corroborate that those inexpensive, fast, and simplified techniques are actually or can be used as a proxy. It's a difficult thing, as you understand. Every industry tries to establish some standards and actually police the behavior of the members, and if somebody does not meet the standards, they no longer have any seal of quality, whether it's accreditation or whether it's confidence of the fellow members.
Okay. Is neuromarketing another trendy fashion thing, or neuromarketing is here to stay? I'm asking this because in the last 30, 40 years, we have seen this philosophy, these trends in management, such as total quality management, such as reengineering, such as Six Sigma. So what is the case about neuromarketing?
Well, I'm hopeful that it's here to stay because it's actually improving and evolving as we speak. At some point, you have to realize neuromarketing had bad publicity. So, you cannot be trendy with bad publicity. The first effort had to be geared to overcome this perception of the Frankenstein kind of knowledge. I think we are over with that. So the point is to prove ourselves to the industry. There is a certain momentum, I would say, and how do you measure fashion? You can look at the Google hits you get when you type neuromarketing. Close to 1 million today, and you might just check, I haven't done it, that perhaps 2 years ago it was half that number. There's nothing wrong with fashion. We have fashion in almost anything. But I think that it could be either a long-term fashion or it's going to stay. There's a lot to do which is actually going to convert neuromarketing from a fashion phenomenon to something which is a permanent feature. If you take any textbook of marketing, published or applied in the United States, in the field of marketing, you will get maybe 6 pages devoted to neuroscience, a neuroscientific approach to research out of a book which is 600 pages long. That tells you something about the marketing mainstream accepting or being a little bit doubtful of what neuromarketing is all about. There's a lot of work to be done. And obviously, without neuromarketing being taught at business schools, it's very hard to actually reach beyond the tipping point where we want to actually help educate managers who are going in their practice apply those techniques and those principles. But with the right approach, yes, there's certainly more marketing managers these days who are aware and perhaps appreciative of neuromarketing. It will stay.
It will stay. It's here to stay. Great. In a nutshell, what is the current state of neuromarketing and what can we expect for the near future?
Well, we're doing fine. We are growing. One very positive phenomenon which I have noticed is that over time, companies in the field became less suspicious of each other. In other words, there's more communications between different neuromarketing companies. There are more publications which give each of us a better insight what somebody else is being done. We can actually solidify a little bit all the experiences and try to bring it to the step where more theory-like approach can be developed. In other words, this might help define marketing a little bit better and also make sure that we use current achievements as a base for the future development. To the best of my knowledge, there are probably around 300 companies practicing neuromarketing worldwide. There's obviously room for more. These are usually boutique small companies. If you look at the total market for neuromarketing services, it's still not as big as it could go, and you can use some very rough proxy ratios, the amount spent on promotion and advertising, the amount spent on research, and how much is spent on neuromarketing, to see that this is just a fraction of all the money being spent the world around. And what you could probably argue is, well, it's in the best interest of everybody to spend a portion of your budgets on that kind of research because it can complement, but it also can add to the quality of information you get about the market. So I guess I'd be moderately positive in terms of what is going to happen in this field and how is it going to move forward. And that, if you allow me, that's also thanks to the efforts of this association and also other groups of neuromarketing professionals.
Yeah, before the last question, we are in the context of Neuromarketing World Forum in Barcelona, the yearly forum congress for the field. So just to let our viewers the context we are, because you have mentioned it several times. To finish, Leon, do you have something you would like to share with the people that are interested in neuromarketing?
Well, one thing I could suggest to younger people or young at heart people is try to learn about this field for two reasons. One, it's intellectually very exciting. There are so many interesting things you will learn. This will also help you maybe better manage your own life. Marketing is everything. We market as individuals. We market ourselves every minute of our life. We sell ourselves to employers. We interact with other human beings expecting something in exchange. So it's very helpful in many respects. The other thing is that if people today consider careers in business, I believe that it's to their advantage to know quite a bit about neuromarketing because, again, it's very helpful and it broadens the qualifications and skills of any manager. I would recommend that people consider taking classes in marketing, whether at official programs, online, on whichever possible way they can, or if nothing, just read books and articles. There's plenty of that stuff being published these days.
Great. Leon, thank you very much for your generosity, sharing with you your time, sharing with us your time, sharing with us your knowledge.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
Equally so.
Thank you.
Gracias.